I didn't do that. That's weird.
Neither did Oh, and if anybody has any thank you notes from our World War II speakers, you can send those forward too.
Yeah.
No, I will also
You know what?
collect them on
Let's collect them on Thursday because we'll do an announcement before class on Thursday. That'll make it easy to remember. Okay. Now that we have created various magical ways for you to get a wonderful grade in this wonderful class, all right? I hope we can just focus on some history, right, and enjoy ourselves, right? Because I hate constant announcements. All right, so let's do it. All right. We are talking about the Cold War today, and there are a few, let's see, I still have to move stuff. Yeah, order's good. Okay, we are talking about the Cold War today. Go on. See? This one is on, according to the thing right now.
Okay, it's waking up.
Okay. All right, we're going to talk about the Cold War. We have so little time left in this class to talk about something that I think is profoundly important. All right. The Cold War. Why is this important? Number one, this is recent history. And number two, probably most of you don't understand it as well as you need to. And the reason why is number three, we are in a time period today in which we have a lot of the same international issues, right? We, for decades and decades, the United States was pitted against the Soviet Union, right? With its heart being Russia. And for decades, we were set on the brink of destroying each other, right? At any moment, somebody could push a button, and then somebody else could push a button, and everybody would be dead, right? And now, when you look in the newspaper, you will see that we have issues with North Korea and Russia, and these are the exact same places that we're going to be talking about when we talk about the Cold War, right? So there's a trope. It's one that I hate to repeat because it gets repeated so much that it loses all its meaning. But this idea that history repeats itself, we're there, right? And so I want to make sure that we understand this really well. But in order to understand it really well, we have to finish up what we were saying about World War II. So as we approach the end of World War II, there are a number of things going on. This is dead, of course. There are a number of things going on. And as I was mentioning before, the United States, as we were fighting Japan, we were doing a little game called island hopping, where we were going and taking back one piece of Japanese territory after another. And it was a terrible, bloody sort of warfare, right? And we went and just like I was saying with Iwo Jima, where Mr. DeYoung fought, that thing is just a rock out in the middle of the Pacific. It had 20,000 Japanese soldiers on it, and almost every single one of them fought to the death in these tunnels inside of this rock. And so what America was discovering was that they were not sure how they were going to beat Japan. Like, they did not know at what point Japan would actually surrender, because we had gone and sort of gobbled up all these islands that they had conquered, and yet they were still fighting, right? And so it left us with this huge question mark in terms of, all right, what on earth are we going to do? How are we going to deal with this problem of fighting Japan? Now, ultimately, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, he is the one guy who breaks the tradition set by George Washington of presidents serving only 2 terms, right? He serves 4 terms as president. And as a result, afterwards, we amend the Constitution to actually make it part of the Constitution rather than just a tradition that a president can only serve 2 terms. Why was he elected for 4 terms? He was president during 2 of the most extraordinary emergencies that the United States ever faced, the Great Depression and World War II. And so as a result, people felt it made sense to elect him for more than the traditional 2 terms. Ultimately, though, he is a sick man, right? He had polio. It was not well known to the American public at all that Franklin Delano Roosevelt could not walk, that he could not walk. He had these steel braces that were on his legs so that he could kind of swing his hips and make it look like he was walking. So if you ever see, there's very little footage, but if you ever see footage of Roosevelt out somewhere, you'll see him either holding onto a podium to hold himself up, or holding on to the governor of whatever state he's visiting or whatever. And he's sort of walking, but he's not really, right? So it was all an illusion so that the American people wouldn't realize that he was actually disabled. So he was our first, at least physically disabled president of the United States. And ultimately, he dies in office. He dies in his 4th term. And his vice president, Harry S. Truman, becomes president of the United States. And Truman, where's Truman? See, these are out of order. Truman makes a decision, a very difficult decision, to pursue a particular project. Now, we're all acquainted with the idea of nuclear warfare, but I want to go through a couple of things here. Oh gosh, here they are. Okay. We had been developing what was called the Manhattan Project, led by this guy, Oppenheimer, who's a physicist. And the Manhattan Project was an effort to create a nuclear weapon, right? We knew it was possible. We knew it was something that could occur. And we knew that through physics, we knew it was possible. And so we began to pursue this project in secret in what was called the Manhattan Project. We had been pursuing it for a while. It is important to understand that it was made possible in part because of German scientists who defected from Germany or who we brought from Germany after we had defeated Hitler, because that's where a lot of the knowledge that could actually do something like this was held, was in Germany, where they had the strongest physicists available. And it's important to note that Hitler made a lot of advances and was pursuing this exact same sort of thing, right? He was making a lot of advances. He was the first one to develop sort of missiles, like the V-2 rocket, which he could shoot from Germany into France or into England. And it was a ballistic missile that would travel a long distance, right? So that was kind of an innovation that the Germans had developed under Hitler. But America works on this secret project. And we develop these nuclear bombs. We test them. We discover that they work. It's important to understand, like we all know what a nuclear bomb going off looks like from pictures, right? The big mushroom-shaped cloud and all that sort of thing. But it's important to understand that when they were doing this, they weren't actually sure what would happen, right? They, in fact, they knew there was at least some probability that by splitting an atom, they would create a chain reaction that would split all atoms and destroy the Earth/the universe, right? Like, and they were like, yeah, let's just do it anyway, right? And so that's a I don't know if I would have taken that particular gamble myself, but they did. And so they developed this project, and ultimately it came down to President Truman having to make a decision about how he was going to end the war, right? How was he going to end the war with Japan? Because it was so costly, it was so hard, and they imagined what it would be like to have to actually invade the main islands of Japan and fight all the way through Tokyo and major cities, and how many lives it would cost, how many years it would take if their Japanese opponents were willing to fight as long and hard as they had up to that point. And so ultimately, Truman makes the decision to use nuclear weapons. And he drops them first on Hiroshima and then Nagasaki. This is the bomb. And they're very successful in terms of what we might call shock and awe tactics, right? It's very, very disturbing to discover that your enemy can wipe out a city with a single bomb, right? And so they dropped the first one on Hiroshima, and Japan still does not surrender. And so they dropped another one on Nagasaki, and they didn't realize that Japan was just sort of reeling and were about ready to surrender. But they dropped another one on Nagasaki, and they were gambling here because they didn't have a third one, right? And so they kind of thought, we're going to use this extraordinary measure in order to win the war, try to convince Japan to just give up the war, right? Now, this is important for a couple of reasons. Number one, who are we dropping this bomb on? Is the city completely occupied by Japanese soldiers? No, right? We're dropping it on civilians, right? We're dropping it on non-combatants. And so we go back to an issue that we saw in the Civil War with General William Tecumseh Sherman of this idea of, is it okay to go and drag non-soldiers into a battle? Now, Sherman didn't kill non-civilians. He just destroyed all their property, right, in order to convince the South to give up the war. But here, we are actually wiping out cities full of civilians. So does it make sense, right? And I'm asking this. I want to have a little bit of a discussion. This is what I mean, like, hey, let's actually talk a little bit with this whole history thing. Do you think it was justified? Do you think it makes sense for the sake of ending a really terrible war to go and drop a nuclear bomb on civilians, or is it simply not okay? Yes?
I think in this circumstance it was. It's still terrible, but it was, because if you look at like Okinawa, for example, like the people, they were so indoctrinated that literally during the entire thing civilians were dying, and up until the very end, you have civilians jumping off of a cliff.
Yep.
So you have to think, like, how many more people would have died if we actually had to go through, invade Japan, and all these poor Japanese people who are so almost like spiritually dedicated to their government would have either died trying to kill Americans or just killed themselves. Yeah.
We talked about communism and communitarianism and those sorts of things. There's also a cultural communitarianism that Japan, China, and certain other Asian cultures have, where they have a very deep sense of commitment to their nation, very often to the extent of thinking that it's not really that big of a sacrifice of my individual life for the benefit of my country, right? And so it's a powerful piece, yeah. During that battle, there were 5,000 kamikaze pilots. Okay, so there were guys who were just trained to be able to get the plane up off the ground, and it would have a missile, it would have a bomb in it, and then they would go and try and hit an American ship with this plane to do damage to it, right? So they were suicide pilots. Yes.
I think that logically it was okay, and I'm glad that it had the effect that it did. I'm glad that it was so. Final, right? But I think that if I had to make that call, I wouldn't have made it. Like, without knowing what the result would have been, I don't think that I would say, yeah, let's go blow up a city full of civilians.
Yeah. Okay. So you think it makes logical sense, but you wouldn't have pushed the button.
Right.
Is what you're saying. Okay.
I wouldn't have known the end result.
Right. But are you glad? But okay, so let's say. So then, if you're Harry S. Truman and you're not sure if you know what the result is going to be, well, you wouldn't do it, is what you're telling me.
No, I don't think so, because there's the chance that that it just did bad things, that it didn't have any positive repercussion, and then I've just killed an entire city full of civilians.
Right, so you just wiped out 2 cities for nothing, right? And then we're just going to have to go and fight anyway. Yeah.
This is probably a dumb question, but before we even got to the point of using the nuclear bombs, why didn't we just pull out of the war? I mean, World War II was basically ended at that point, so we didn't have a reason to continue fighting with Japan. I mean, we could have easily wiped them out, so why didn't we just say we don't want to kill you, so we're going to stop fighting?
Yeah, that's a very good question. The answer, I think, is in part, it's a fairly complex one, but it's important to understand. When we watched the little video about Teddy Roosevelt, the one guy mentioned that he won a Nobel. He was the first United States president to win a Nobel Peace Prize, right? That was actually a Nobel Peace Prize that he won by mediating an end to a conflict between Japan and Russia that was going on way back then, right? So this is like, at that point, about 40 years earlier. So Japan had been conquering territory for a while, right? Like they had controlled a large chunk of China. They had controlled a lot of these islands for a very long time. And it was seen that if some sort of action were not taken, that they might just rebuild, right? They might just go right back to it. That's probably the best argument for it. The cynical argument would be that we just had this concept that you fight a war until you've officially won, right? So I think both of those factors are in play. I don't know which is, what percent is, which contributes what percent of the decision making. All right, I need somebody to say it was wrong. Right here.
Well, it's hard for me to take any sides, but I do think about it a lot more because I lived in Japan and I've been to the memorial.
Yeah.
And it's really humbling to see that because I love Japan.
Yeah.
I love the people there. And they have people going around having you sign papers saying like being against nuclear warfare, and they're some of the kindest people I've ever met. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I still don't even know if I could say it's right or not, but I love Japan, and it's interesting to see that perspective.
Right, so it makes a difference when you're actually acquainted with the country, people, culture, right? I mean, that's going to come into play in Vietnam here, probably next class period. But yeah, that's a good point, right? So if we don't know these people, if we were, let's say that we were all foreign exchange students for a moment, and this class were being held we're in an alternative universe, right? And this class is being held in Tokyo, and we're talking about the bombing of Utah Valley, right? You would probably, being from here, or if you're from here, or having lived here at least, you would probably go, whoa, that feels wrong to even discuss the idea that it could have been right. The rightness of it is hard to think about. Yeah.
I guess one thing too that always makes me wonder is we've talked about how the results were unsure.
Yeah.
Well, if it was I mean, I guess it would be tested without we test on people, but I'm just curious to know if they knew those were the results, if they would still do it, or if they wouldn't, because is that what they wanted?
Right.
So.
Right here.
Well, I just think when you're bringing the civilians into the war, it kind of puts a question on what are the rules of war, what are the things that define how moral our fighting tactics are at war. When do you draw the line of just keeping prisoners of war and keeping people, or just killing everyone that you encounter, or who really is involved in the war?
Yeah.
Where do you draw that line?
Yeah, so if we put it into a modern context, one of the big issues that we talk about now are drones in warfare, right? These unmanned drones that will go in and attack a place. There was a meme that was floating around Facebook a few years back when there was the bombing at the Boston Marathon, and I saw it. I was like, wow, that really makes you think. Anyway, it was this meme where they had said, the the people responsible for the bombing at the Boston Marathon were found hiding behind this house. And luckily, we were able to use one of our drones and strike the house and kill them. 14 other people were killed, but we got those guys who were hiding behind that house. And that sounds crazy to us, but of course that's what we do in conflict right now, right? In our military conflicts, we use drone strikes to get at enemy targets, and civilians die, right? So there's a corollary there. There was a hand. Okay.
With respect to the bombs being dropped, I'm curious. I don't know the answer, but I'm curious as to what options they would have had other than a civilian populace if there was a way to militaristically cripple Japan rather than just bomb the cities.
Yeah.
Because I understand that the cities were kind of industrial powerhouses.
Yeah.
And fueling the war effort. But was there a base? Was there places other than that?
Yeah.
Bomb?
Okay, so this is a good question, and it's one that I hope that we can discuss a little bit. Let's put a pin in it as something that hopefully we can talk about on Thursday and then again next week. But it's a thread that I want you to look out for, which is we have now entered a new era of warfare, right? Actually beginning in World War I, but it wasn't very sophisticated then. But starting with World War II, air power as a means of fighting is really a new field. And it has a factor to it that we really like, which is that theoretically you can use a plane and you can attack a target and you can do a lot more damage down on the ground, and you might lose a plane or some crew member on a particular bomber or whatever, but relatively speaking, air power is able to do a lot more damage relative to any damage it might take, right? And so this aspect of air power makes it really, really appealing to us. And it's still really appealing to us as a tool in warfare, but it has interesting consequences. And I will try and point these out as we continue our discussion. Let me show you something that kind of answers that question. First of all, I do want to show you this. I think it personifies a little bit this. I'm not sure how well you can see this, and I don't know that I have any working laser pointers here.
How many people died out of the bomb?
I cannot remember off the top of my head. If somebody looks it up real quick. No laser pointer. Anyway, okay. For those of you, if you look carefully, this is actually an area of pavement. And this is kind of, we saw some of this in both Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which is that people who were very close to the actual, they would drop the bomb and it would detonate before it hit the ground. And the people who were closest to the detonation, an odd effect happened where they were effectively vaporized, but so the energy that passes around them leaves the ground a certain color, but because they absorbed a certain portion of it, their shadow is permanently burned. And so you can find these pictures, both Hiroshima and Nagasaki, where people's shadows of the moment in which the bomb went off were etched, right, in there permanently. And so you can actually see the people who died. And this is an example of a shadow. All right, I want to talk about this guy for a minute. This is Robert S. McNamara. And he became the Secretary of Defense under Kennedy, served in that position for a long time, was extremely influential, but he has his start much earlier. He worked at Harvard, and as a Harvard grad, he's one of the ones that we're not really sure whether or not we want to claim. But anyway, he worked at Harvard, and I think he's given both a very unfair rap and a fair rap in certain respects in terms of his reputation in history. But this guy was a very calculating, and I don't mean that in the like evil sense, but just he was a guy who thought in terms of numbers, right? And he was originally hired by the government to do a number of contractual things. And in World War II, he was hired specifically to crunch numbers, right, using the old punch card computers that they had back then. He would use his system to try and help the government to figure out the best way to fight in World War II. And so we're going to watch a little bit about that, and because it ties directly to what we're talking about here. Let me just find it again. So yeah, Robert S. McNamara. This is from this is actually my favorite documentary. It is not a Ken Burns documentary. It's one that is, you'll see that the style is very different from like a Ken Burns documentary. This is called The Fog of War, and it's just where they sat down and interviewed Robert S. McNamara. He lived to be quite old. I think he lived to be 99, something like that. And so they interviewed him and sort of asked him for like his life lessons. And so this is like, I think the subtitle is like 8 Lessons About War from Robert S. McNamara. And so it kind of bounces around throughout his life. But I'm going to we'll watch clips of it because he is central to how World War II is fought. He's central to how the Vietnam War is fought in particular, because he was Secretary of Defense at the time. And we're going to look at the way that he thought about them and the way that shaped the wars themselves.
And then the war came. I'd been promoted to assistant professor. I was the youngest assistant professor at Harvard. Annual salary, by the way, of $4,000 a year. Harvard Business School's market was drying up. The males were being drafted or volunteering. So the dean, being farsighted, brought back a government contract to establish an officer candidate school for what was called statistical control in the Air Force. We said to the Air Force, look, we're not going to take anybody you send up here. We're going to select the people. You have a punch card for every human being brought into the Air Corps. We're going to run those punch cards through the IBM sorting machines, and we're going to sort on age, education, accomplishment, grades, etc. We were looking for the best and the brightest. The best brains, the greatest capacity to lead, the best judgment. The U.S. was just beginning to bomb. We were bombing by daylight. The loss rate was very, very high. So they commissioned a study, and what did we find? We found the abort rate was 20%. 20% of the planes that took off from England to bomb targets in Germany turned around before they got to the target. Well, that was a hell of a mess. We lost 20% of our capability right there. A form, I think it was called Form 1A or something like that, was a mission report. And if you aborted a mission, you had to write down why. So we get all these things and we analyze them. And we finally concluded it was baloney. They were aborting out of fear because the loss rate was 4% per sortie. The combat tour was 25 sorties. Didn't mean 100% were going to be killed, but a hell of a lot of them were going to be killed. They knew that, and they found reasons to not go over the target. So we reported this. One of the commanders was Curtis LeMay, colonel in command of a B-24 group. He was the finest combat commander of any service I came across in the war, but he was extraordinarily belligerent. Many thought brutal. he got the report. He issued an order. He said, I will be in the lead plane on every mission. Any plane that takes off will go over the target or the crew will be court-martialed. The abort rate dropped overnight. Now that's the kind of a commander he was.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
So he was essential in this aspect of helping them figure out how they were going to go about figuring out issues like this, right? Like what was this abortive rate? Why were 20% of the pilots turning around? And this LeMay that he just mentioned is going to become important in this next scene that we watch, as we talk about the planes that were used and how they were used.
The U.S. Air Force had a new airplane named the B-29. The B-17s and B-24.
Who did you see working in all those images? Women, right? So there's so many men at war during World War II that you've got a lot of the factories are employing women who are working in them most of the time, or older men.
Wars in Europe, bombed from 15,000, 16,000 feet. The problem was that they were subject to anti-aircraft fire and to fighter aircraft. To relieve that, this B-29 was being developed but bombed from high altitude, and it was thought we could destroy targets much more efficiently and effectively. I was brought back from the 8th Air Force and assigned to the first B-29s, the 58th Bomb Wing. We had to fly those planes from the bases in Kansas to India. Then we had to fly fuel over the hump into China.
He talks a little more about this. It's important to remember, because this is going to come up later, that China was our ally, right? And we very much expected them to continue to be our ally after this point. Okay, I just got to find the right spot. No, that's not it. Right there. Okay, so this is where we're going to actually get into part of the question about what were we doing? What were we doing before we dropped the bomb? The nuclear bombs in Japan, okay?